Welcome, everyone, to the Contact Center Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. We have an incredible guest on today, Dean Czuma. Now, Dean, you, for a long time, a decade, most recently, you were at McKinsey, and you were in charge of the Global Business Services Unit. I'm going to let you talk a little bit more about that. That puts you in a position of an expert right away. And you've worked across B2C, B2B companies in almost all regards. So we're going to tap into a bit of that knowledge today. And we're going to talk about specifically our customers and our contact centers and why they are not a cost center, as lots and lots of companies still look at them, but they're an investable engine for the company that puts so much more out when you actually feed that engine and you feed it with fuel. So before we get into that conversation, though, I'd love to just have you maybe spend just a minute here and tell us a little bit more about your background.
Sure, Steve. And first of all, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And for that prolific introduction. It's humbling to hear that, but I try not to take myself too seriously. Anyway, I did spend 10 years building the McKinsey Global Services mid to back office operations. And the McKinsey world is around delivering client service. And so every facet of the business is looking at that head of the spear of delivering great client value. And when we took a look at our global back office, we were thinking the same thing. How do we position ourselves with great services, with a great experience and capabilities that would be able to deliver value all the way into the client team rooms on a daily basis, but also how can we treat each other internally in a fairly large, complex global organization, like customers and suppliers, and collaboratively work together to drive value and to increase value all the time. It was an amazing experience for me to be a part of stewarding this and developing a vision and growing it over the last number of years. Before that, I was also involved much more in a B2C environment in a med device company and built a very complicated rule-based reimbursement customer service system where we did a lot of contact center-based selling, upselling, customer service, product replacements, product fitting, training, education, lots of things. So there were a lot of interesting things that went along with that and also turned that into a back office or the cash operation as well. I do have quite a bit of experience in different environments doing quote unquote contact center, but also driving value through talent concentrations.
Just out of curiosity, why is this subject, contact centers as an investable engine, why is that something that's near and dear to your heart?
Yeah, a contact center or a talent concentration that is interacting with customers is probably the most important and often the only source of interaction between a company and their products and the customer themselves. When you think about it, unless you're a monopolist, you're competing for the mind share and you're competing for the experience share of customers with whatever product that you're selling. And to fall short on that, to not really make that a meaningful part of your value stream and invest in that heavily in this front line of amazing capability, we're falling short in terms of your investment potential, what you're doing with your investments.
That seems to be right away back to the title of our podcast today, is the contact centers as an investable engine. Yet, so I'd love to have your opinion on this because there's actually a McKinsey study that I quote all the time that I think is just phenomenal in terms of reorienting our thinking. And it was from 2023. And I think there was over 400 different B2C, B2B companies that were evaluated, highly profitable companies that had the greatest return on shareholder value. And one of the number one conclusions that came out of the study was that across the board, the number one differentiator was CX, was customer experience. And what you were just articulating, even to the point of sometimes it's the only real interaction between our customers and the company. What does that say to you, that study, that focus on CX? And then as we're talking about contact centers as an investable engine, how do those two things connect?
I think, first of all, the experience of the end customer it has to be important in terms of teaching you as a company how to do business. And it's offering you or potentially offering you the capability to pivot, to move to whether it be product modifications, whether it be more product diversity, or thinking about how products are delivered, serviced, how they're paid for, how you develop an annuity stream, and how you do those things. So I think that for me, it's become more and more important. And if you think about the birth of e-commerce back 25 years ago and how we've learned to move from a brick and mortar environment, going on to one side of the pendulum, a digital environment, and now a mixed environment, how can you really use your customer and your contact center and the front end of your engine in working with customers to think about how you map all that and how you can increase profitability, but also increase capability and revenue opportunities with those types of things. So the study doesn't surprise me at all. Being inside at McKinsey for a long time, we focused on internal transformations, and our colleagues are working with clients all the time and gathering insights and delivering things like that. So it's definitely a believable metric.
So the term investable engine implies large ROI. Why else would you be investing to create an engine that's going to produce something incredible? If you had to articulate what is the potential outcome, the promise of investing in a contact center, if you could paint that picture for us, what would you say?
I think it's across two or three items. The first one is in customer retention. I think everybody's competing for the mind share and the share of wallet of their customers. And if you're working in an environment where other people sell your products and they possibly even do it in the same channel, beating them with great service and great capability is going to help win for you. Now, you could have product failures, you could have quality issues, you could have mistakes made. But at the end of the day, what the customer is going to remember is probably not the cable that they bought from you, but they're going to remember the experience they had when you shipped them the wrong one, or they ordered the wrong one and then you were able to get them the right one. And we've seen this in multiple e-commerce environments where the customer service agents are empowered and emboldened to keep the customer. And at all costs, one customer, when you have 1 million customers, it's a very small cost at the end of the day. And so that's kind of thing one. Thing two is, what are the new revenue opportunities and the stickiness of the customer? Is it a one-time event? Am I going online to the auto parts store to buy a battery? Or am I going online to the auto parts store because I have 3 cars and I need to buy things all the time? And I'd like to think about working with someone who understands me or my pets. For example, people will understand my pets' names and understand what size they are and what kind of sweaters they might like. And they might be able to even show empathy when my pet is sick or when my pet passes away. And I think those are the kinds of experiences that move you from the generic environment to one where there is specialization. And then I think the third thing is around what the breadth of product and let's call it upsell cross opportunities. What more can your customers experience from you, and how are you going to profit from that? That customer relationship, once it's acquired, is an incredible potential opportunity. How do you take advantage of that? And I think that this is a very big channel for you to do that in a world where you have a lot of competition.
Just last month, Forrester was cited at one of the reports saying that on average, 77% of revenue comes from your client base. Yet we chase new logo development as organizations all the time. And we have to, obviously, there's no argument about that. But when you sit back and you think about, okay, this year's revenue, 77% is going to be coming from the people we already have. It changes the beacon of where you're headed and where you're focusing your time and your energy. And one of the things of all the things you said there, which was amazing, is you used 2 incredible words when you talked about the agent, the front line with the customer. You said empower and embolden. But in a world of, I'm looking at this as a cost center, I'm looking at dialing back. Like I'm checking out KPIs like average handle time, and I'm trying to squeeze it down. And that's metric from the board down. So it drives our thinking. But what you're saying is exactly opposite of that. It's what it feels like.
Let's dig into average handle time for a second. That to me is a metric to dispatch your customer and to get the customer that loves you and has called you for attention to get them off the phone as soon as possible so you can move on to the next one. And I think a better metric, a much better metric would be single call resolution. And can I satisfy the customer? Who cares how long it takes? If it takes 4 hours and it takes 3 different interactions with supervisors or product managers or something else to resolve my issue, calling FedEx on the phone or whatever the case is to make sure that the product gets there, why wouldn't I incentivize and reward people for saying, no, I'm not going to take my break. There's no red light blinking on my phone to take the next call. I'm going to press screen when this customer is satisfied, and they're going to fill out a survey at the end that says they're satisfied, which is going to yield our NPS going up and all this other stuff. but it's a satisfied customer rather than one that the operational people have dispatched so that they can say, I handled 17 calls this hour.
It's not a quota-based system. You're not judged on how many calls you were able to take and how quickly you were able to. I love the word dispatched them. It almost gives like a throwaway, opposite of customer experience. And there's not a company out there alive that doesn't say, I don't want to be a customer centric. I don't want to be a customer focused or a customer obsessed organization. Everybody says that, but you've got to actually operationalize that. You've got to say, okay, now tactically, how are we going to execute on that goal? How is that a part of our go-to-market strategy? And so you've talked about operationalizing contact center excellence. What do you mean by that?
Steve, you brought up a couple of good points right there about what is the mission? What is the mission of the company? And in my mind, everything that we do as a company should be cascading from what our vision and our mission is and what our capital structure is. And it should be communicated in a way that people at all these levels can understand as well. And if you're saying to a frontline customer service agent or a quality engineer that our goals are to make a 25% gross margin, they don't quite understand that. But if they say, I want to have excellent customer satisfaction, I want to have a 90% quality rate or something like that, I want to have high quality products, then they can understand that. And it must connect to the mission. So if you are the type of company that didn't really feel the need or didn't need to have a strong customer service backbone, then focus your energy somewhere else. Focus on whether it be your supply chain turns or your product efficacy or whatever it is that you're thinking about. But when you're thinking about the value stream that includes the customer, I think operationalizing it's not extraordinarily difficult if you think about the right metrics. What are the things we're trying to accomplish? If we're trying to accomplish great service, if we're trying to accomplish single call resolution, if we're trying to accomplish this channel as a revenue generating engine, the customer called with a wanting to buy a $100 product and they ended up with $150 a product or $200 a product. Those things don't happen for free. They require training. They require the inputs to the emboldenment that drives that value. So I think that the right metrics is one. The second one is around how are you training your people? Are you putting them through a 5-day training system on how to use the call center system and how to use the AI bots that are sitting on the screen? Or are you training them in what are the customer demographics that you're actually talking to? What kind of products are they interested in? What are they going through besides buying your product today? How are they feeling? What is going on within that environment? And giving them some more insights and letting them play with that as they're talking to their customers. So treating these frontline agents like, number one, adults that know how to have a conversation, that know that the person on the other end is a human, and thinking about how to use tools in order to get you there. And the emboldenment part and the enablement part is quite complex at the end of the day because you have to have great systems in place. You have to have fast systems where the databases are very well constructed, and you have to have good training and good capabilities that go there. But then the people have to be able to use it, and then they have to be able to escape the script when needed and do it naturally. And you and I have both been on a phone with somebody where you really needed to talk to us. You could just feel this is not going anywhere. And the person is in a cage and doesn't have the capability to move out and up to solve your problem in the first call or whatever the case is. I think those are the winners, the ones that into the value stream of delivering service and not into what happens when the call comes in and how do I get the call routed to the right place. It's how do I solve the problem for the customer?
A very vivid picture that you're painting here in terms of the value that can be created. There's two other major areas of value I want to ask you about. You mentioned someone might call in and they were looking to purchase a $100 item or collection of items, but they come off the call and they bought $150 or $200. There's actually a capability of the contact center, the agents, as salespeople. They're cross-selling, they're upselling. People, when there's new product launches, they're calling in, they're asking questions about people that are considering to make a purchase. There is a direct correlation between sales and revenue for the organization and how the contact center handles all of those situations. Like, how do you characterize the size of that opportunity, that contact centers as actual sales agents in a lot of capacity?
It certainly depends. If your product portfolio is set up and positioned, and for example, I had a fairly large order to cash organization that did claims handling and sold some products. And so what we did was we fortified their product lines. We bought a company and bought a bunch of products that they could actually sell to those clients, those customers. And they would episodically talk through where they're at. And they would say, well, I'm also thinking about, I need a pair of compression garments, or I need this, or I need that. And they said, here, go to this website. We can help you with that if you really wish. If not, it's fine. Setting the value stream up for success is a big part of it. And it's also about core context. We sold a very high priced product to the client, but what products would go along with it that might make their life better, or make it easier for them to use, or make them a little happier, or make sure that they didn't have to go to the store and buy something else. And that, especially in the places where you have a contextual sale, you can really drive that into your contact center. And it's funny that when I talk to my leadership team about some of the most important things, there's two things: always be recruiting and always be selling. And if you're always sell without the dogmatic sound of sales, it's sound of help, it's the sound of understanding, it's the sound of empathy and how I might be able to help you a little bit. And I think those are the things that really work. What we do in the world where we work is we start at the beginning. So when we hire contact center reps, or we hire mid to back office kind of colleagues, we're thinking about their collaborative skills. We're thinking about their empathy, how they handled things when they were in college, or when they handled things in high school, or in their family, or in their church, or whatever the case is. And we put those things together. And those are the ones that end up floating to the top in terms of capability. And you're crafting your employment, your workforce for these things. And I think that's a really critical part of it. If you're looking to find people that can pick up a phone and press a button and are good with computers and things like that's great. But you also should think about the softer skills that are aiming at the value stream that you're proposing to have. And again, it goes down from the cascading metrics of what's important for your company.
So that's one major area of value. And value creation is this soft sell, this human approach to helping. There's the customer experience kind of bucket that we talked about. There's another one, which is, the contact center is talking to customers all day long. There's another set of customers. It's called the internal departments inside of their own organization. They are customers of the knowledge that we're gleaming from having thousands and thousands of interactions with the customers. What can product learn? What can marketing learn? What can sales learn? Operations learn? Pricing? It goes on and on. So in terms of this value engine, how do you think about the kind of relationship between the contact center and all the other departments?
First of all, the contact center itself, again, it depends on the product and the product offering. In the worlds where I worked, the people that worked in the front line were sitting an aisle or two away from the marketing department. They were sitting an aisle or two away from the quality and testing department. They sat close to the HR group as well. And so they were always thinking about what the end-to-end game really is. And a lot of times you don't get that opportunity. And I'll give you an example. At McKinsey Global Services and many companies, we concentrated our talent in different locations that were not necessarily in the offices where the consulting was done. But what we did do is we started to think about structurally the support system to the infrastructure that supports client service. And we started moving departments into those areas and then recruiting people across the various functions so that there could be, number one, a cultural connection, number two, a connection to the product and service, and number three, the ability to do problem solving and to do real-time engagement on what's happening. I was going to leave it to the way at the end in terms of what haven't we covered, but I think we're going to cover it. And it's around the continuous improvement mindset. And if your frontline is a dead end to making your product or your service better, you need to change that. And I think there should be a loop that has the front line feeding back as an equal in the process. We're the ones that are on the front line seeing, we're digging the ditches here. And we don't necessarily know what the intended use model was, but we're seeing how it's really being used. And we can really feed back to that. So I think those are very important aspects of how the company structures itself. And I think the other thing is how the company treats its own departments. Is there a we and a they? Is there an elite top-down version of the company where, the salespeople are most important, and then the engineers, and then the customer service is at the bottom? When you have a team of people that are all focused on the mission, and there are different professions, there are people make different amounts of money in their profession, but being treated like they're part of the value stream and treated like a collaborative thought partner and someone who is part of the value delivery system, it lifts all boats and it makes everybody feel better about what they're doing no matter what. And it creates a better environment, frankly.
So you just touched on a really important area there. You mentioned the word culture about 10 minutes ago. The environment, is it a top down? Is it a we versus them? Is customer support at the bottom of the totem pole? How does culture play into the value engine across the board, specifically in the contact center?
Culture is huge, I just have to say. And I know the difference as a consumer. And I also know the difference as a B2B or a B2C executive leader, what the differences are. And I'll give you an example in each case. And as a consumer, I really know when the person that I'm speaking to about a problem has three other companies that they're working with, three other consumer companies that they're working with, and they've got three scripts in front of them, and they're going down the list of the scripts and they're just reading it for the first time, or they're not trained in it. They're just trained in how to get me through the problem. They're not trained in understanding. They don't know the product. Always there's I'd be happy to help you solve your problem kind of thing, instead of, oh my gosh, I've never heard that one before. That's a tough one, because sometimes they are tough and you're a human. And it'd be nice to hear that it wasn't like, I will certainly solve your problem for you today. And on the other side of that, it's a person that is, hey, this is on a recorded call because I get trained as a result of this, but how can I help you today? And then there's an interaction around the product, and I know the product, and I've been working here for 10 years, or I've been trained in how to use the product and I know how that works. Internally, it's really important that everybody is rowing in the same direction, and that the sales reps are selling a product that there's a belief system around, and that everybody in the company, everybody in the organization is really aiming at solving for the same set of issues. And I've had friends who have left our offices in a couple of my different companies in senior leadership roles. I've had conversations with them when they've actually come back to our firm. And I said, wow, you were here for a couple of years and you went to that bank and you stayed there for a year and then you came back. You interviewed for a new role back here at our firm. Why did you come back? I've had dozens of these conversations. Their number one answer is, I came back because of the culture. When I'm here in this office, I know the product and I know the service that we deliver. Everybody around us talks about it. We get to talk to our clients, or we get to talk to people that are very close to our clients. The people in the main offices that are working with me treat me like I'm one of them. Where I went to this place, they treated us like a vendor. They mistreated us like a vendor. They did not really consider us to be part of the family. They blamed us when something went wrong. The systems were poor and there was a problem, and they said it was us. And we tried to problem solve and tried to ask them, tried to show them what was wrong, and they just ignored us. Those are the types of organizations where there's some healing needed across the value stream in order to be able to figure out how to deliver value a little bit better. And a lot of companies go through this, by the way. It's not something that hardly ever happens. It happens a lot.
It was one of the things that I think you and I talked about right before we hit the record button is this day and age, when you're thinking about moving companies or you're interviewing that company as much as they're interviewing you. And I talk to chief technology officers, CROs, that say one of the most important criteria, if I'm making a move, is the culture of the business that I'm going to. In fact, I've had those same I had CRO CMO combinations come on the podcast, and they attributed over 50% of the success of the company to their company culture, because it attracted the right high performance individuals that contributed to high performance teams. Their engagement turned into phenomenal engagement with the clients and ultimately better client retention, acquisition, and revenue. So it was refreshing to hear people like a chief sales officer, a chief revenue officer who are under quotas to drive short-term revenue, to talk about something like company culture in such a way that it's such an incredible, important part of the revenue generation engine. So I think it has, like you're saying, massive implications for the value engine that we're talking today, because agent turnover has always been one of the biggest issues in the industry. If you can train and retain your good agents, your good people, then everything you've been talking about here gets a little bit easier.
Also, the idea of, and I've had quite a few conversations recently in terms of where capital investments are going, and the idea of stacking enterprise systems, number one. So you have a workflow engine, you have an ERP system, you have an HR system, you have customer relationship management software. All of those have some very big overlapping capabilities, but they also have some niche capabilities. And a lot of corporations are buying pieces of or all of those things and then not implementing them at their full potential. And they're creating annuity streams for the software companies, and they're actually solving for some of the problems, but they're not necessarily getting at what the core is, but they're disinvesting in places like service. They're disinvesting in order to be able to pay for that. Otherwise, what ends up happening is that their gross margins are just going down. And you have to find ways to replace that. And where are you going to replace it when you're creating all these shiny new penny systems? And are those adding value? And are you actually creating systems that are enabling your frontline and enabling your company to be successful? I think there's this view of what is practical and where to put the investments, and to not treat the front lines like, there was a buzz phrase, it was mission critical minimum wage. I heard this from somebody and it drove me crazy, because there's like this apparent disinvestment in the only people and the only systems that are actually interacting with your customer directly. And I think that when you put it that way, I think people finally come around, but it takes a little bit of thought, and then looking across the entire landscape of the capital structure and of the value structure of a company to be able to figure that out, and then to make some tough choices in order to put more investment in places where you're going to get customer retention, or you're going to get the ability for low cost acquisition. You want to have zero marginal cost revenue opportunities. And this is one of the ways to help get you there.
I want to go on another hour. This is fascinating. I think you already mentioned that. I asked you at the beginning, I said at the end of the podcast, our poor human brains can't retain too much in one sitting. And if there's something we wanted people to take away, like the most important takeaway, I think you touched on it, but if you want to elaborate just a little bit on what you want us all to take away, is the most important thing from our conversation today, what is that?
Yeah, I think a couple things. The winners will lead an experience, and it starts with the way that customers are approached. And I think a corollary to that is that it's critical to earn the right to deepen a customer relationship. And who is best equipped to do that, and how do you do that? Sometimes it's through a great product, sometimes it's through great service, but you've got to figure that out as a company and figure out how to really get there. Another thing, we did cover the human experience. I think we talked a lot about that. And I do think, even though we talked about it, I think it is a key takeaway, and that the human factor is critical in creating a competitive distance environment, especially when product offerings catch up with each other. Which running shoes am I going to buy? Which telephone am I going to buy? In this country, it's easy, but in a lot of countries, it's a lot more competitive. And I think those are really important. And I think that one thing we didn't really get to is that processes and standards are important for consistency and quality in this part of the value stream, but don't depersonalize the function. And if you have depersonalized it, it's time to think about repersonalization a little bit as we're moving forward, especially when we have the new tools coming forward with AI. There's a lot more answers out there. There's just, boom, a paragraph full of answers. But are those the right answers? Are they too generic? Are they just plain hallucinations? You have to be careful about reconnecting with repersonalizing the function in order to be successful.
I love that. What a vivid repersonalizing it, instead of holding all the KPIs and holding it to scripts and call quotas and things like that.
Everybody is probably doing that stuff. It's where the magic is that you want to be skating towards.
I'm pretty sure that there's going to be questions that come out of this. Would it be appropriate that maybe I gave out a link to your LinkedIn profile that people could reach out and talk to you?
Yeah, absolutely. That's no problem. We'd love to engage and chat with folks.
Dean, thank you so much for coming on and just sharing insight after insight. Very inspiring. And I know it's going to be inspiring to the audience. So I just appreciate you coming on and sharing with us today.
I appreciate it. And I also appreciate that there are many views of this, and there are many situations where any one of these treatments will either be the most important thing or not the most important thing. And I think contextualizing this within the boundaries of your corporation and the mission, I think, are super important. So let's keep that in mind as we're having these conversations, because a lot of things stick in small places, but some stick across many. And I really had a ball talking to you. I think we could probably go on for another hour and talk about a bunch of other things, but this has been a lot of fun, Steve. Thanks a lot for the time.